am Orlando Jones, and I just want you to know that the Moana Nui Podcast will be starting soon. Stay tuned, yo.
I'm Veronica Taylor, and from myself and Ash Ketchum, I just want to say, Moana Nui, I choose you!
Aloha mai kako, everyone. Welcome to the Moana Nui Podcast. We are so excited to be launching our celebration of Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiian Month in the month of May. Mahalo for joining us tonight. My name is Moana McAdams. I am the host and founder of the Moana Nui Podcast. I'm also the children's book author for The Adventures of Nakoa and Nohea, and obviously an advocate for our wonderful Indigenous, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and communities of color. Welcome, and I'm so excited to have all of you join us tonight. I'm really excited to have my partner in crime, my sis Dana, back with me here on the show. It has been a while for us, a little bit of a bumpy ride here at the start of 2023, but we're really excited to have her back with us this month. So I will let her introduce herself and send it right over.
All right. Aloha, everyone. I am Dana, the other half of the Moana Nui Podcast. I am a event planner, content creator, and line producer for another show, The Bop with Karen Ashley, the Yellow Power Ranger, and I'm a photographer and voice actor. So we're so excited to kick this month off with these panels to recognize ANHPI Heritage Month this month. So, of course, I'm going to hand it over to the yin to my yang, the Renaissance woman of our time. I'm going to give it over to the lovely, the beautiful Moana.
Alrighty, guys. So tonight's topic is priced out of paradise, how Native Hawaiians are forced off of their homeland. And I really wanted to have this conversation because a lot of what Hollywood and mainstream media puts out is the beautiful side of Hawaii. And it is a paradise, right? Like, it is a wonderful place to live. But there are a lot of aspects about our homeland that they don't talk about. And so that is the reason that I wanted to raise this particular topic, especially like, you know, we love to enjoy these wonderful IPs. Like, for me, obviously my name is Moana, so I'm going to be a huge fan of Disney's Moana film. But there are critics out there who talk about, you know, like how it just further perpetuates the colonizer mentality and only talks about like the beauty of the islands. But like, what about the actual lives of the Pacific Islanders and the local communities, right? Because it's not just Native Hawaiians, it's not just Pacific Islanders. Hawaii is a melting pot of cultures, and there are a lot of unique challenges that our communities face. It's not all bad, it's not all good, but we're really trying to find balance. And one of the things I wanted to do with this particular episode is have some conversations with some folks who have connections to Hawaii from different perspectives and different lenses. And so I'm really excited to have our three panelists with us tonight because they come at this topic from very different perspectives. And I really, just want to hear, what they have to say about this, learn about their experiences, and most importantly, share it with all of you so that you can better understand kind of the context of Hawaii and the ongoing issues that our communities face. So before we get started, I will, introduce you all to them, tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll jump into our panel. So our first guest is Kavika Hoke. He has been working in the film industry and in Hawaii and in Los Angeles for 8 years. He has spent 6 years working with Disney Parks Entertainment. He's worked on Paradise City, $1 Million, The Deadly Yoga Retreat, Aloha with Love, to name a few. He is now leading Manavakal Productions and has been has moved back home to Hawaii to create opportunities for Hawaii talent and filmmakers to create authentic stories about Hawaiians that live in the islands. And his production, which I'm really excited, newest production is called Moku Moku. It is a Native Hawaiian comedy series that will be coming to us very, very soon. Maybe you were lucky and you got to check out the pilot episode, but all I can say is rodeo prostitute. Okay. And another thing I want to say about Manavakal Productions is that, Kavika really wants to transform the way that Hollywood does business with Hawaii, and to be a beacon for diversity and business ethics in the entertainment world, and provide sustainable jobs that lift new careers, foster local seasoned professionals, and most importantly, bring value and benefit back to the Hawaii community. So with that said, let's bring Kavika up to the front. Aloha, Kavika.
Aloha. How's it, everyone?
I cannot wait for this series. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Mahalo for joining us. Good kind laughs. All right. Our second guest is Kelly Makura. Kelly is a native Hawaiian Okinawan from Hawaii. She is an artist, grief art, and social justice facilitator, and she discovered art as a need to find healing during times of great loss. Her abstract art style is expressive, similar to the passionate expressions, sharing and talking story with loved ones. She finds art to be the perfect medium to explore and process emotions around grief. And she facilitates rituals that are deeply connected to her art practice and have become a bigger part of who she is. Kelly has earned a master's degree in education, leadership, and policy with a concentration in teaching adult leaders and social justice pedagogy. She also hosts workshops to facilitate a better understanding of the systems of oppression and to examine and implement action steps to dismantle racism internally and throughout the communities that we live in. Her passion for doing this work is driven by her professional research and personal lived experiences as a Native Hawaiian woman living far from her homeland. And so Kelly now lives in Oregon, but she's also a mama to 3 keiki and a corgi mutt, and is a wife to her high school sweetheart who she lives with in Oregon. So welcome, Kelly, to the show. Aloha.
Aloha, Kelly.
Welcome. Mahalo for joining us. Excited to have you on.
Thank you.
Alrighty. And our last but not least panelist, Brad Starks, is a fashion, lifestyle, and beauty photographer, a TV film producer, a videographer, and a freelance creative consultant who works for various private editorial and advertising clients. He creates still images, video and film content, and social media management. He is currently based there on the island of Maui. Very good friends with Kavika. He travels frequently for clients in New York, LA, Chicago, Europe, and Japan. Some of his fashion clients have included Nicole Miller, Emmanuel Ungaro, and Oscar De La Renta. He's also worked for advertising clients like RJ Reynolds Tobacco, Mercedes-Benz, Spiegel, and Bulova watches. His advertising work has been published in Vogue, Cosmopolitan, Harper Bazaar, and Marie Claire. Having added TV and film to his skill set, Brad has also worked on several projects with major studios and agencies worked worldwide. His growing list of partnerships includes Netflix. Finding Ohana is one of the IPs that he has worked on. He's also worked for B&G Goods, Profile Television LLC, Benjay Studios International, Anthropology, Over the Edge Productions, A&E Networks, Hurley, and Hana Productions. Now, guys, that's a whole lot of resume. So I'm really excited to have Brad with us. He's known for an extraordinary, diverse, and imaginative work. And in the last 2 years, he's also acted as a creative director for some of the largest brands in the United States and in Europe. Brad brings his unique talent and down-to-earth attitude to all his projects, in addition to his commercial, editorial, and advertising work. So I'm excited to have him on. We're going to give him a second because I think he had to step away. But there he is. That's right. He likes to do that. So let's welcome Brad on. I should have known that.
I was gonna make like this little exciting entrance, but how you doing?
I spoiled your intro. Sorry. Welcome, Brad. It's so good to have you. Oh man, I'm really excited because just reading all of you all's bios and introductions, I'm like, wow, what a diverse group we have here. And so, before we get, jump started deeper into the questions, let's go around and give everybody introduction. Can you tell our guests, what is your piko? What is your connective tissue to Hawaii? Where's your family from? Were you in high school? All the local kind questions. So we'll go ahead and start with Kelly.
Yes. I born and raised on the island of Oahu. I lived there for most of my life, and then I had the really lucky chance to live on the Big Island for several years, and that's where I met my husband. We both went to Honoka'a High School. So yeah, Honoka'a grad. And then we both went to the University of Hawaii Manoa. And yes, go Bows. And yeah, all my family's still there. Grandma, aunties, uncles, sisters, cousins. My mom had recently moved up here. She's a few minutes away, which has been such a lovely gift. But for the most part, a lot of my family's still on Oahu.
Awesome. Oahu representation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Kavika.
How's it, everyone? Well, my grandparents are from Maui. My grandfather was raised Makua and Haleakala. My grandmother's from the Pili. They moved away from Maui when they were teenagers and joined the military. I was a byproduct of that, being born and raised in Oceanside, California, just outside of Camp Pendleton Marine Corps Base. And my family is split in half, half on the continent, half throughout the islands, predominantly Maui and Oahu, with a few on Big Island. And I was lucky enough to spend most of my life growing up in a unit of Polynesians and Native Americans and African Americans throughout my youth, where we got to protect and procure our culture because we were segregated from the rest of the society. So my grandparents used that as an avenue to help start the Hui o Hawaii of San Diego. And that's a lot of what maintained my culture and my roots, was having a halal that moved with us as we moved throughout our lives, serving the country. And I'm just excited to be here today.
I love that. And I can't wait to talk, a little bit more also about how the communities of Hawaii kind of connect on the continent too. So Brad.
Hey, how's it, everybody? My name is Brad Starks. I am friends and work regularly with Kavika on Moku Moku show, which you mentioned. My parents are from a place called Rockford, Illinois, which is the second largest city in Illinois. Early on, when I was a kid, I got interested in photography and wanted to see if I could do something different from my dad. Not that what my dad did was not great. My father used to play for the New York Jets, and it was always thought that I would also, follow in his footsteps. But, early on, I kind of figured out, that, constantly ramming your head at full speed into guys larger than you was probably not going to be a great idea. But I got interested really early in the arts, and especially photography and fashion photography. And my father was very, very, supportive of that. So I ended up going downtown for photography. Was lucky enough to work with some of the greatest photographers there. built up a portfolio for myself, started to work for all of the leading agencies there. And one of the, probably after I was in it for like about 4 or 5 years, a couple of the more successful models that I was shooting for were coming back from Europe, and they were like, hey, this is the card that I got from my agent in Paris. This is the card I got from my agent in Italy. They told me to tell you, if you want to come out here and shoot some of their models, they'll put you up in a place, they'll pay you for it, they'll circulate your portfolio. So after about a year, I was just like, yeah, let me try that. So went there to live there for like 3 months, and I ended up there for about 3.5 years. So after that, I moved to New York, established myself, created sort of like a network, still kept all the contacts that I had in Europe and brought those with me. And once the recession hit in New York, gosh, I was probably there for about almost like 30 years. Once the recession hit there, I was just like, God, there's got to be something. It's got to be another place to go. And I ended up luckily out here. And one of the people that I met who's just become, just a really great influence and another partner in crime is Kavika. So two bald-headed guys in Maui can go quite far. So we've got a lot of interesting surprises, and we've got a really great history that's kickstarted here. So I, like him, we're really excited to be here.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, you've had such an interesting career. You've worked with so many different brands, and ended up having Hawaii become your home now. How long have you been in the islands? And like, what do you think makes Hawaii special for you?
Gosh, it'll be 11 years for me the end of next month, and during sort of like our first upcoming like season of shooting Moku Moku. So that's going to be exciting and seminal for me. What makes Hawaii special? What makes Hawaii special, outside of, like you say, obviously the nature and the connection sort of like with nature of what you get to see every day is incredible. But what really makes any place special really is the people. It's the people. I've been so fortunate to have learned what ohana actually means, and to be steeped in this culture is life-changing. And I've personally witnessed people from the mainland who have come here who have never experienced sort of like the nature and the vibe that we get off when we work together as a crew, and they leave forever changed. So that's one of the most, I think, important things about living here and experiencing that here.
Wonderful. So Kelly, what are your thoughts about that? Like, for you, you grew up in Hawaii, but you now live in Oregon. So how long have you been living away? How did your family end up on the continent?
Yes. So I thought about this the other day. I am very sad to say it's been 20 years since I've moved off the islands, and that's long. That's 2 decades to be away from home. And, everything Brad just shared about why being in Hawaii is so beautiful, that's a big part of what I miss. I miss the community. I miss the people. I miss the culture. I miss the food. Oh my God, I miss the food. And, when we go back home to visit, we're not there as tourists. We're there coming home, and the kids love it. I have a 9-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 16-year-old. And even though they've lived on, the continent for most of their lives, they go home and they get to be around family, get to see the cousins. I have 27 cousins. So you can imagine like all their offspring. So my kids have tons of cousins, and they're like, why are we not living close to family? And I'm like, oh my God, it's a long story. It's hard. It's hard to be away from home for so long. And yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. What are some of the difficulties that was it difficulties of living in Hawaii that led you away, or was it more like of a natural transition with career and things like that?
Yeah, so honestly, it was more of a like looking into the future. Was like,
Mhm.
okay, I had good internships. I was at UH Manoa. I had great internships. I had a good part-time job, but I was looking around at the cost of living was increasing. I was looking at the kind of pay that I was getting, and I just kind of felt like I saw the writing on the wall. Like it was going to be really difficult for me to have a family, and to be able to survive outside of my own parents' home. You know, the hope was that I'd have my own house one day, and that I'd have a great neighborhood that my kids can grow up in. And that was feeling more bleak than I had hoped, which is why, like, I think it was 3 days after graduation, I got an airplane and I was in California.
Mhm.
So I didn't miss a beat. But I have found, because the other thing I was seeing too is that they would pay a lot of people who had come from the continent to work in Hawaii, and they would pay them more than they would pay locals. And that was very apparent. And I thought, okay, if there's any chance that I can make it in Hawaii with a good salary, maybe I got to move away and kind of increase my value that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely observed and experienced a lot of the same things with a longer look to the future. And I'm glad you brought up how they hire people from outside of Hawaii and end up paying them more. So we'll dig into that a little bit later too. But one of the threads I kind of want to stick with is the ohana concept, right? And how it is your relatives, but then also like especially Native Hawaiians have that concept of Hanai, and the broader extended family who are not your blood relatives, but it's like the people that you vibe with, your community. So I wanted to go to Kavika. I know when we've talked before, you talked about how like, oh, you remember your cousins and like kind of growing up in Hawaii. Like what was that like for you to one, not start your life in Hawaii, but then how did like you kind of survive on the continent? Like how did you keep in touch with your cousins? How does that look?
Well, I owe a lot of it to my grandparents. When they had to make the tough decision of moving away, it wasn't just them; it was a lot of their generation. Much of what they our college youth and middle aged Kanaka are going through right now is the same thing that happened in the late 50s and early 60s with our tutu and our kapuna. And so, I was lucky in that sense that we were a much more tightly bonded culture back then. They were just into statehood, so they knew their identity as Hawaiians. So they were able to take that with them as they moved abroad. Most of their opportunity came from joining the military, and with that came the equity of having a higher ranking position. By the time that I was born, my grandfather was a master sergeant and retiring. So he had enough to take care of even his grandkids that had to move into his house at that point in time. But even then, at that point, the 80s were still a trying economy for most of us. So lucky for us, all of the colored regiments and platoons and units, they all got put together. So it really kept us intact as a people, because we were able to, if we did have to move, we moved as a unit. Luckily we didn't have to move that often. Really, my grandparents stayed locked in Oceanside for the majority of their lives. They contemplated moving back many times, but it was always wrought with, well, how do we help take care of my tutu's land in the Pili and pay all those back taxes, because she lost most of her family's land to just being able to afford to pay for groceries. And then whereas my grandfather's side of the family, most of it was just taxed out until the house was, had a lien put on it. And I spent most of my life, whenever I did visit Maui, whenever we went up country, the only thing I ever knew about my grandfather's childhood home was through a chain link fence that said A and B on it. So there was a lot of effort put into bringing us back once my grandparents could afford it, even though we never moved back. A lot of long summers, even some extended times in the year when they felt it was better to just keep me here than send me back to the continent. But growing up on the mainland, you know, it had its moments, but it definitely wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. You know, I mean, the great part of having our hui, keeping us intact as Hawaiians was one thing, but also constantly facing the gentrification wave. I mean, even for a place as progressive as California, it was a land of blue laws, you know, all the way up from the 70s through even the early 2000s. I mean, it was it was still illegal to have curly hair in the workplace for a person of color. I mean, I grew up watching my mother flat iron her hair every morning, pouring argan oil on it to keep it fresh, but then having to flat iron it just to get that promotion, and then every day waking up at 4 a.m. to do it just to be taken seriously. You know, which it boggled my mind. It made a lot of hard points in growing up, you know, beside her, because she had a cultural identity shift in herself to be able to adapt. And at the same time, I was living in the freedom of trying to embrace my culture that my grandparents had afforded me. So it was very, yeah, it was confusing at many points. There's a lot of my life where I look back now as an adult, having understood it, why she had to do what she had to do. You know, but through all of it, we managed to maintain our family. You know, most of us stayed in the San Diego area. Some of us moved off to Washington, Oregon, you know, East Coast. A lot of my family went into the service. So lots of Navy and military guys that ended up, you know, working Washington, D.C. eventually. But, you know, if there's anything that I appreciate the most about growing up on the continent in that time, was that we at least still had each other, and there was a great effort made to keep us intact as a people. And some days, as I've returned, you know, and noticing the great decline of Kanaka who can afford to stay in our homeland, that, you know, part of that is what really keeps us alive. You know, it's a very night and day. You know, it's almost like I lived in a time capsule for, you know, most of my life, that we were protecting a culture that was nearly extinct at the time. And now that I return back to Maui as a formed adult, and I see things and I know things that some people just turn to me, oh, how you know that, bro? And I'm just like, well, doesn't everybody know? You know? And then it's just like, wow, you know, it even happened here too. And so, you know, to some degree, I'm lucky, and I am proud of what my grandparents established in me and in my cousins to make sure that we could stay, you know, true to our people. But now, as someone who's moved to Maui and made it a full-time, you know, effort to bring and repatriate more Kanaka back home, I noticed there's still so much to do.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I like that you brought up the time capsule kind of thing, because I think it's like one of those unique things that you know, anyone who's spent some time away from home and come back, you know, there's some things that are still the same in a good way, and some things that are still the same in a not so good way. So yeah, that's one of the unique challenges, I think. But I also liked how you talked about like the cultural identity challenges, and, you know, like how to navigate and adapt between the two different places. Kelly, did you find that to be a challenge for you too? And how do you help your family, especially your kids, right, who are not, you know, amongst their family and amongst the Hawaiian community a lot? How do you kind of keep that strong for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to mention a experience I had when I first moved to California. I remember sitting in the middle of a meeting and looking around and realizing I was the only person of color in that room. And I was having a firsthand experience of like, oh, I'm very different. And I didn't realize that growing up, right? Like growing up in Hawaii, there's so much diversity. You didn't even have to think about it. It just is, like, it's the way of living. And to then move away and to be treated differently because I look differently was a big eye opener for me. And now that my kids are older and they have interactions with their peers, it's fascinating to learn that some of those interactions still happen today. So even though we do live in a really diverse community, some people have just not enough knowledge, or sometimes I like to say the audacity, to say some things to my kids without even thinking about that being harmful or hurtful in any ways. And so um, I have many conversations with them about how to navigate that, and reminding them of where they come from and why it's important to keep that so close to your heart and to honor that identity, because it feels so you, so them, so unique. Because being away from home, you feel that pressure to assimilate. You feel that pressure to look like everybody else, so that you can also succeed in the ways they do. And then in that journey of trying to do that, you lose parts of yourself, and it's devastating. It's really devastating. So it's a balance. It really is, to be far away, and to do both. But I'm doing my best. I mean, the best thing I can do is to continue to have conversations with my kids, and helping them navigate it in the ways that they can best honor themselves and their culture and their heritage, where they come from, and their ancestors.
That's beautiful. I totally appreciate that. I still find myself, right? Like just like you, living away for like 20 years. Man, sometimes it's weird. Like I don't know if you know, for those who have, you know, obviously gone away and then come back, like it almost feels like your perspective, people look at you like an alien, you know, like I'm like, oh, do you guys not see this? Like sometimes found myself like, oh, don't quite fit in with everybody who's still here, but I definitely don't fit in, like, you know, where I am now. And it's just such a unique position to be in. And sometimes I don't know if I'm gaslighting myself, but I just
on that.
it's kind of crazy. But then, you know, like I talk story with people like you guys, like, no, I feel like that too. And I'm like, okay.
Yes, you're not alone.
Right on. So Brad, like I know, you know, you're not native Hawaiian, at least to my knowledge. So correct me if I'm wrong with that. But I know that you are a wonderful ally and advocate for our community, you know, now living on Maui and working with wonderful, you know, community leaders like Kavika. You know, how is that for you? Because I know as an African American man, you are no stranger to cultural identity and the struggles of what that is. So how is that like for you in Hawaii? Do you find it easier to you know, just kind of like maintain your existence, be Brad, be your person? Like, you know, how is the Hawaii community special to you in that way?
Well, yeah, I mean, being African American and traveling, you know, to Europe as I have, I mean, number one, I've always been made aware of how the outside world would characterize me. Personally, my parents, you know, made a point of making sure that my sister and I understood that at a very young age. And Kelly, I'll tell you, definitely have that strong communication with your kids. And half of that whole battle not only is to be able to play past it, the expectation of who they think you are. And unfortunately, a lot of Western mainlanders only know about people of color what they see on TV. And I grew up in the 70s where, I mean, Kavika will tell you, I mean, there's a well-meaning friend of ours who wrote this script and he needed someone to play sort of like the black character in it. And I had to say the phrase jive turkey like 4 times. And I was like, seriously? And, you know, it's my, I'll tell you something. One of the things that I realized about how lucky I was to grow up within the family that I was in, my full name is Bradley Marshall Starks. My older sister's name is Dana Elizabeth Starks. Now, I didn't think anything of that until I started to go out in the work market. And, you know, as a photographer, you go around with your portfolio and you send the portfolio ahead of being asked in the room and then getting an actual interview. So you make that phone call, and Kavika, listening to you sort of talk about your mom straightening her hair, I'm sure your mother had like that white lady voice. My parents were exactly the same. You know, we were not allowed to talk like our cousins, you know, who talk the street. You know, we can all do that and that kind of thing. You know, that's sort of part of our culture. But one of the responsibilities, Kelly, as a parent, is to teach your children what the world is like. And I mean, Kavika and I can go off on like a tangent here politically about, you know, how there are certain states in the mainland that do not want to teach real history because my child's feelings will get hurt. Well, if we're all dark enough to be hung by the Klan, guess what? Your kids should have it together enough. You should make them morally strong enough to learn the truth of what happened to people like us. But I digress. But I'll make that phone call as Brad starts on the phone and I sound a certain way. And then when I step in the room, they'll be like, oh, you're Brad. You know, they expect the preppy sort of white guy to walk in with an Izod shirt and all this kind of stuff. But then, you know, if you don't let that affect you and you just go in and you just be yourself, and like you say, you just be Brad, people are just like, gosh, you know what? You know, I was wrong about that. And, you know, being able to be lucky enough to travel to Europe and to meet other people and just to let them encounter how together you are and what your understanding is of systemic racism. And I'm not saying that everybody understands that. I mean, one of the things I think that people of color and families of color have in common is that we will sit down to dinner and we will talk about how we need to deal with our white brothers and sisters. It doesn't go the other way. They're not thinking about you. And I think all of us are probably at an age where we've had like that one white friend where we've had to say, hey, Mike, come here. I got to talk to you. You know what you said about so-and-so? You know what that made me feel like? And then they're like, oh, no. But, you know, it's up to us to sort of shepherd would-be allies on what their shortcomings are and understanding of our culture. And one of the things I've really loved about my discovery of living here in Hawaii is that I've always tried to live with aloha, but I've just never understood it the way I understand it now. And I think a lot of kids, Kelly, yourself, you're out there in the mainland, you have a lot to share with people in the mainland about what your culture is about and really helping people see the best in themselves. So I would just say that.
That is absolutely wonderful, because I think that is something that is super important for, you know, those who have moved to the continent. It's like it's a huge responsibility too, because like, you know, to your point, like people only know what they've seen on TV, right? Like, and so that's why I feel like, you know, like it's wonderful to have properties, you know, that talk about our communities and show our communities. But then it's also a huge kuleana, because, you know, you are essentially framing for people like what Hawaii is like, what Native people are like, what local communities are like. And so like nobody expects you to be perfect, but like you do have you know, if you take it the right position, like it's a wonderful opportunity for you to share, because nobody knows. Like you could tell them like any kind of story, right? Like you could be like Portuguese, whatever, you like tell whatever kind of story you like. You can make up stuff, right? But like you have a platform, and I think especially now with technology and social media, like that's a wonderful opportunity. It's also a responsibility though, right? Like, because what message you're putting out there is that people are taking that as like, quote unquote, like the Bible, like this person from Hawaii, this is what they told me, right? Like, so, you know, like I'm going to believe that because that's what I know. Right. So I think that's a wonderful point that you brought out there. So I kind of want to go switch a little bit. We'll talk about what has already been brought up a little bit, the land loss thing, and over tourism and the high cost of living. And I want, Brad, I'm going to go back to you because I know we talked a little bit, in a separate conversation about some of your previous work that you've done with HGTV, House Hunters TV show, right? Like, and they love to feature Hawaii. And so I kind of wanted to get your perspective on like what it's like working, with those companies. And like, at least for me, like as a native Hawaiian, to me, like those shows is beautiful, but they're not selling to locals, right? So like, how is that like working in that particular space? And I would love to hear like, what you were saying, like, do they care about like the locals and what's going on? Or do they just care about like, I want my prime spot at the beach? What is that like?
Well, I mean, like any network that creates a show, like House Hunters, is they're basically trying to come up with a template of a product that if they go to San Diego, if they go to Illinois, if they go to Spain, or they go to any other place, they need to have a setup way in which they show and tell a story that works anywhere they go. So no, they're not. The first season that I worked on, they're not interested in sort of delving into what the culture is like, what your next door neighbors are going to be like. They're basically just taking Westerners, mainlanders who have money, who are looking to get a second home or looking to just start over again. I want to live next to the beach. Hey, let's move to Hawaii. And the way that they would put the home and the things together it really looked like you were walking into, say, like someone's living room at Portland. But once you stepped outside, oh, I'm in Hawaii. So, it was interesting to sort of watch that. And I worked on this show maybe like 3 or 4 times. Like the first season I was involved, and this was maybe like 7 or 8 years ago. I got asked back 2 years later because I was working on a bunch of other things. And then it was the show got handed over to a different production company. And what they decided to do was they decided to, as well as sort of show the homes that were going to be available to mainlanders that were going to move there, they also decided to infuse the culture of what you would benefit from moving there. And it was a really great approach. And they were Canadians, believe it or not, who are a little bit more sort of like, they have a lot more, empathy. I've found a lot of producers that way. And the inside of the homes incorporated indigenous artists that were here. They made a point of, like, on the lifestyle day when the couples are sort of like thinking over their choices, they actually paired them with like a local a chef or like a small place that's like right down the road. And you got to see the faces of the people that they were going, whose community they were going to become part of. And it reminded me a lot of, like, I was lucky enough to work on a job as a creative director for a makeup company, and we were selling the brand and we were going to market it in Japan. So I got to go there 3 or 4 years at a time. And one of the things I noticed in Japan was a lot of, like, the young kids that were qualified, who were very skilled, were leaving Japan because it was just too expensive for them to start a life here. So they were forced to leave. Very much what's happening kind of like here. So, it's it seems to be kind of a universal challenge, not only here in Hawaii, but worldwide. It's really expensive to live here. And I think the community and Maui County as a whole, I think they're beginning to try to do some things. Kavika and I have got an associate or a friend who is in the business of tiny homes. And that's something that, is a possible start to the answer of a bigger problem.
Gotcha. Thank you. So Kelly, I know with your family, you talked a little bit about the cost of living. have you seen, like, whether it's your family specifically or other, families that you knew, any experiences of where people lost their land, like, especially like, Kanakas who are, losing their ancestral lands? Has that been something that you've experienced in your view?
Oh, definitely. And it's devastating, especially as our kupuna are in that transition, in that phase of them becoming our ancestors, and they leave land to family members. It's, and they leave it to multiple family members. It's not just one. So everybody's splitting it. It is easier for folks to say, let's just sell it. Let's just get rid of it because we're going to get a high price. And we'll be able to divide that easily so that we can afford to live. Versus like, how can we hang on to, grandma's land? How do we hang on to grandpa's land? How do we still provide a way and opportunity for family who had to move back to had to move to the continent to come back and visit and have someplace to stay instead of having to stay at a hotel, which is also expensive. So we've seen a lot of that in the last 2 decades, and it's heartbreaking. And then even as a Kanaka, my own family, we've lost land in Ka'u because of taxes. We've lost land in Waimea Valley because of taxes. And, we've lost ancestral lands that was given to our families because they didn't know what taxes were. They didn't know they didn't know how to make money. Like it's heartbreaking. And I hear, my sister was talking about the other day, she had heard more and more families are moving off the islands and moving to the continent because they can't afford land. And I'm like, at what point can some rich person come in and make a difference and stop that from happening so that Kanaka can stay back, on the island? Like, there's going to be a point. We already have such a small percentage of Native Hawaiians. I mean, it's going to continue to get smaller and smaller throughout Hawaii, and it's heartbreaking because so much of our connection is to the land, is to the Aina, is to our ancestors that are buried there. Like, yeah, it's hard. It's heartbreaking. I don't know any Native Hawaiian that isn't dealing with this right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very touchy subject. And so, at least for me, because people are like, oh, why did you leave? I'm like, well, how long you got? Like, do you want to know like the surface answer, which is like the cost of living is expensive? Or do you want to go back into like my family's history? And like, the more I, research about my family and like, recently discovering that like my family was Ali'i. So like getting even more upset because like, do you even know that like this whole town, like, on the island of Kauai, my auntie was telling us, oh yeah, the whole town of Kapa'a and, up here, up in the homesteads, and, that was all our family's land, like, and it's just such a touchy topic. And I don't want to take the time from you guys so to go off on my own tirade, but yeah, it's really, really complex topic. And for those who, don't understand this, like, okay, why is the taxes going up? Well, let me explicitly say, because rich people coming, buying up our land, you have, it could be like huge parcels, like Zuckerberg on Kauai. It could be the whole damn island, like Ellison on Lanai, and what's even like adding insult to injury is that not only are they buying the land, but they don't even freaking live there. You know what I mean? So like they're causing these long-term impacts to people who actually live there while they like snowbird or, do whatever. They come for wherever there's a vacation home, a couple of weeks, and then they go off to wherever the heck else they got, And so, if you come to Hawaii and, one, you're a part of that. And two, like you come in ignorant and you don't understand those issues. That's why you might get some heat from us, like, especially if you're ignorant, because like, come on now, we have social media and please do your research, or listen to shows like us so we can kind of teach you. But this is not like, it's all about education, right? And helping people to understand. Now, after we tell you and you still do the same thing, then we're really going to have a problem with you, right? Like that's when it becomes a little bit more violent, I guess I would say, not that we're gonna be violent to you, but like it's like you're a choice of ignorance now, right? Like so I think that's a very important thing to kind of foot stomp. Now, Kavika, I know your family dealt with the land taxes too. What was that like for you guys on your island in I think you said Napili, right? In your grandma's house. Yeah.
Well, a lot of that conversation was in California for me as a kid. We didn't know for the longest time as an entire ohana on both sides on what was required to even make the process back on it, because some of it just like it was still ours, but then it was just covered in taxes. You want to develop this, you want to parcel this, you want to do anything with this in the modern American way, you got to pay all these things. Until then, you can stay on your little 2 rocks, but you want to move over to rock number 3, it's going to cost you, So my grandfather, because he recognized that there was no way of getting both families' lands back. And so he put a lot of effort, he used his hazard pay from going to Vietnam and Korea, and he put it into his mother-in-law's hands. And he that was a big alliance between our 2 families, was recognizing like we have a fight to save one of ours, and so he made it a point, even though he never wanted to get into the decision-making process, he found that he was blessed to be a master sergeant with good pay. And that meant that he could provide extra money to the family's cause. So his patronage to my grandmother's family really was key, in my youth. I recognized of how much he'd done for that. Then, fall later into the years where he's out of the picture, my grandmother's retired, and then, her health, and how she has to rely on the rest of what my grandfather gave her. And still we're fighting to pay and maintain that land, even just to, have a chance at just walking on it. It's really given a lot of perspective on what everybody else has to go through. I've got a cousin that I was blessed to meet through the Huis as a teenager, and then again as an adult. And then I found out recently he moved to Haiku because he was able to prove his Kuleana lineage to the land in Haiku. And it's tough watching him sometimes. I'm very proud of him, and I know he's very proud to be there. But the efforts you have to go to get back what was yours is just unbelievable. I mean, he lives in the last parcel that they could give him back because all of the other houses surround, his family's territory. And so he lives in a little gulch in between. He has to go down through this little cut that he made. He had to post a sign. And then even after he moved in, the immediate response was, call the cops. We got one homeless guy in our gulch. And then the cops come out and he's got, I got these papers, I got these things, here's the elite contract, here's all this, and then they're like, oh, well, you got to post a sign now. And then you got to tell all your neighbors. And then the neighbors start calling code enforcement. And then the neighbors start finding ways of weird complaint, and he's just a young kid with a collar patch and trying to learn, where his place is in the universe. But then we're now surrounded by a bunch of NIMBYs, the classic not in my backyard. And it's like, brah, it wasn't even your backyard. So what you getting on about, And so that can be very disheartening too, because there's a lot of people that think they're afforded ownership of this land. The term kama'aina has blurred over the past century, to befit the colonizer more than it befits the people of this land, And so that's been a really hard thing too. The first time I came back, I was just hanging out with some localized transplants, best term I can come up with. and that's it. Also harkens back to my time capsule thing, is that they start giving me this whole, oh, you don't even speak right Pidgin. I'm like, bruh, I speak 1985 the kind, okay? You don't even know, bruh. I speak the Pidgin before it was the Pidgin. So you don't talk like that. You don't, no, bruh. So between the appropriation of our land, the homogenization of our culture, even that now that there's a new level of like there's allies, but then there's people that you recognize that look like allies but are really just appropriators. And then it becomes, oh, bless you, little savage, for trying. Here, let me teach you how to speak the pidgin and spread your aloha. So it's, I'm surrounded by caricatures, and that's like half of what's inspired my show, is that we're now in a land of caricatures. It really is. You have some great people left over from the old age of the Hawaiian kingdom. You got tutus and kapuna from every walk of life that fused into our kingdom, and you see it, in different colors and different origins everywhere, and you recognize that last piece of old Hawaii as you return. But then you also see this new generation of people who think they're afforded, because it's just another star on the flag to them. It just says, oh, we colonized it, it's ours, I can live in my American dream here. And it's like, we were trying to live the Hawaiian dream long before you arrived. And, sometimes, your dream is someone else's nightmare.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for that laugh. That it's a laugh. It's one of those things where you gotta laugh so cry. Because like we laugh about this, but it is serious to us. Like it's generational, trauma, it's, oh man, especially, being on the continent. But I'm glad you mentioned like about people who kama'aina, and like what does that even mean?
What does it mean? We don't know what it means anymore,
right? Kelly, from your perspective, like what does kama'aina mean? Because I don't want to give let's everybody give your definition of like what it meant to you when you were in Hawaii.
That's a great question, because to me it feels like it's changed over time. Like growing up, that meant the folks that were born and raised there, whether you were an immigrant that got to be, families, plantations, like that's everybody who ended up there, that's kama'aina. But now it's used, I see it used as almost like a catchphrase, or like a, it's everybody can be kama'aina, and it's like, well, not really. But yeah, that's what I've noticed over the years, the change.
How about you, Brad? How have you seen the kama'aina term used?
One of the initial reasons why I first moved here, outside of just trying to get outside of New York, was I met a really incredible woman, and we started dating. And she was third generation Japanese who was born and bred here. And I heard her using that phrase quite a bit, and I asked what it meant, and she was just like, well, if you go to like a restaurant or something that's local that's here, some will offer you a kama'aina rate simply because you're part of the community, and in order for a lot of these places to sort of like stay in business, the prices have to be at such a rate in which they can afford to pay these damn taxes that you guys were just talking about. So it becomes necessary